Okay, I don't think we have any adjustments to the agenda. And is the public all here to see the budget presentation? Hopefully. Okay.
Be part of it, I think.
So I'm just going to turn it over to you, Dave. So you did.
Okay. Well, it's that time of year, and to cover into the budget, we're here specifically for the budget presentation. I will reiterate that the budget presentation is probably the most important thing that we do. It's probably the most important thing that as a select board member can do is to make comments on the budget, and eventually you will adopt the budget as your own and present that to the members. Overall, when we put this together is what we feel our needs are for the upcoming year and beyond. When we look at this, we're looking at not just next month, but trying to set ourselves up for 1, 2, 3, 5 years from now. So I think that is pretty effective in this budget. But it is also essentially our guiding light for fiscal year 20. It puts the parameters on the departments and myself. It also essentially outlines ahead of time what we plan on doing and come up with the numbers that we think are necessary to do what we feel we're going to need to do. That being said, I will say that this budget, last year's budget and this year's budget is probably one of the most interesting budgets I think I've worked with. I've worked with a couple of different ones, and this one has some real complexities to it. When we get down to it, as a town, we're very simple. We don't have a whole lot of services. We're simply kind of administrative staff. And highway, we have library and recreation. We don't have a full-time fire. We don't have a police. We don't have zoning. So it should be somewhat simplistic, and as what we do is somewhat simplistic. However, due to some of the maintenance issues that we've been talking about for the past year and a half, and some of the things that we need to kind of keep up with and get caught up with, and where we are for a budget and kind of where we started out with, really, challenges us and, to get to where we need to go. And I think you'll see that as we progress as well. This actually is last year's budget. I'm just going to kind of refresh your memory as to what we did last year, because it plays kind of an important role in what we're doing this year. If you recall, last year, one of the main thrusts of what we did, actually down just a little bit, but we were facing, we still kind of are, but it was a little bit more of an issue last year, our deficit. And if you remember last year in the general fund, we essentially budgeted $75,000, which is right here. You see a big increase. It was essentially put under as a miscellaneous line item. We had miscellaneous expenses the year before of $11,000. It jumped to 85. We essentially put in 75 grand for a miscellaneous item to raise revenues to tear down what the general fund deficit. And how we did that was we essentially utilized surplus money to help offset the increase in taxes. Some of the other things that we had, that some of the big drivers was in particularly capital improvements. You can see that here we went from 30 to 60. This was essentially the library roof at $50,000 and another $10,000 for the recreation steps. Again, this is kind of a roadmap. Speed bumps come up. We bypass the $10,000 for recreation steps because of the activity center, the children's center on Brownsville Road. We have since spent $20,000 to $25,000 over there, repainting that and doing some work inside. But Last year, the thought process was with those two items, and that was kind of a big mover for us. Some of the other smaller ones was,
So 186.
library, we increased
Column 8
expenses
is
here
for
for
2 years.
maintenance. Particularly the HVAC system, the rec center had, some increases to it. But the other main driver was
Dave, I mean, when you're looking at capital improvements, historically, there's just
A radical change from 180, where'd it go?
186.
Yeah, 186,000 down to 30, down up to 60. So what?
Column H.
Under
Total capital improvements.
line 38, column H, I, and J. Just what's the 186 just seems so high compared to the other numbers in that reserve.
It was 186, 180, that was for the 21 house.
Or maybe you didn't want to say that.
So in fiscal year 17,
Okay,
we spent cash essentially for the 21 house.
okay.
In 2018, we turned around, you don't see it here, it's in the 2018 budget under a separate section. We took out a loan for that because obviously the 180 wasn't helping our deficit situation in the general fund. Again,
Okay.
we had a surplus in the highway fund, but that's what that 186 is.
Thank you.
The other driver to this, if you recall, and I can't remember if it was the fire and the 21 house, one or the other, or both, but we had an increase. You can see where we go from the 318 to the 365. That was essentially some loans that we took out, and we needed to budget for that in 2019, and I believe that's both the fire truck that we purchased in September of 2018 and the loan that we took out for the 21 house in 2018 as well. We needed to start paying that back. We needed a budget for it. So last year's budget, that was the crux of what we were dealing with. That was kind of, from an overall perspective, that was it. You know, we had other smaller line items going up and down, but the story to be told by that budget was what you see there. General fund last year, budget-wise, again, we utilized surplus money from the highway fund, to keep it simple, to kind of bring that down, but it was a 13% increase. Now, when you went over to the highway fund, we did very little in the highway fund. We had some increases in a couple of places, giving us an overall 3.63% increase in the expenditures, which you see here. However, the big story here was the use of this money right here totaled $90,000. So we utilized $90,000 of surplus money to help keep the tax flow down. Remember, we had a 13% increase in the general fund. We had a surplus in the highway fund, so we used the surplus, and therefore we kept the tax rate. It drove the highway fund to a minus like 5-6% tax rate, bringing the overall tax rate to about a 6.5, again, coming close, about a 6.5% overall increase. And that's going to play into effect this year. One other story to kind of tell is the equipment fund. So this was last year, and I was kind of looking at this, and we also, along with using the surplus, we kind of cut some monies to kind of make up for, again, to bring that overall tax rate down. We were looking at what at the time perceived to be a pretty hefty or nice looking cushion here. And again, this was my first year and kind of Bill's first year doing the capital plan for the highway equipment. Recreation trucks are in here as well. We were kind of looking at this and we're like, yeah, that looks pretty comfortable. And we cut $15,000 out of the amount of money that we were putting into the equipment fund. Well, when we get to this year's equipment fund, it tells a different story. We had to bump everything up basically a year. We bumped the purchase of the one-ton truck up to 2018. We purchased the 10-wheeler over here in 2019. It's due to come in any day, I hope. And now the latest is the van, which we are going to end up purchasing the one from Gateway after discussion with Muniers. This gets bumped up a year, so these numbers are going to look different for this year. But that's what we were looking at last year, and why we made some of the moves that we did. Can't look at that yet. Okay. Now, that brings us to this year. And if you look, now this year is almost a complete opposite of last year. This year we're looking at essentially a level budget in the general fund and about a 13% increase in the highway fund. Although again, some of what we did last year is going to make things a little bit more complex, but let's talk about what's driving the general fund here for this year. Again, we got some other things, kind of large and small, playing into things here. But based upon what we're seeing after this year's appeals from tax adjustments, assessments, Doug is recommending, and I think we've talked about this, is to put more towards legal expenses. So under administration, there's a fair amount of stuff in administration, but you're going to see a jump here from 297 to 335. That's because I budgeted in the administration department an increase from $15,000 for legal expenses to $50,000. So that's a $35,000 jump in that line item there.
Is insurance in administration?
It is. It is. Health insurance in administration came down about $9 grand.
So,
Okay, for health insurance, that is.
so with the legal expenses, how did you project from what seems like a high legal expense year to a number for the following year? Just added some money.
You know, we had 3 this year. We're already about 22,000. I'm expecting at least that. We're still not done with our biggest appeal.
Right.
So that's going to go into 35, I suspect 30 anyways.
Okay.
So I didn't want to shoot for the moon, but I didn't want to leave it short either.
Right.
So it's just, you know, kind of, we're in uncharted territory here because, and I'll pull it up, but 2 years ago, we didn't even have anything really expensed for the legal expenses. And I was trying to keep it fairly broad. We got too into the weeds at this point, but so there you see legal expenses, you know, we had 58,000, but it's kind of deceiving because the professional services is more than just legal. We had a fair amount of coverage in the finance department last fiscal year. Our audit number is also in that number. So there's a fair amount in there. But, you know, if you look back towards legal professional services, that 7,200 and that 7 was actually for our audit. And we didn't even have a legal budget line item. So this is kind of, you know, this is something that, I mean, you know, maybe you guys could tell me, we haven't done a reappraisal in 13 years, Doug, 15 years?
Not this 2006 was partially statistical. We're attempting to go to every house. I think last time I've done this.
I think the landscape has changed a bit, Phil. At this point, we've got some property values that are, you know, over $1 million. I think that, you know, it's not, you know, I think that they'll, from what we're seeing, it appears as though we'll face some appeal challenges.
Yeah.
The assessment here, again, one of the adjustments we made last year, if you recall, because we had those 2 new loans pop up, the fire truck, the money that we put to the fire truck equipment fund, we slashed from 50,000 to 25,000. And at that point in time, I had a layout over the next 3 to 5 years that we were going to build that back up to 50. So it was scheduled to go from 25 to 37. So you see a $12,000 jump in the assessment for that. That's over last year. But the years prior, again, we had been budgeting 50 grand for the fire truck. The finance, we got a jump there. We hired a new shiny finance person, and his salary's a bit more than our last one. So you'll see a change, and that's the change in the finance department. And the library, I got that up there. It's about a $10,000 differential over last year. They are scheduled to speak next week. So we'll get into a little bit more detail about what's going on over there. The reality is I don't believe there's a whole lot of changes, but again, you know, they kind of pop up as to, you know, something that I think is worth noting from the overall picture. And this year, unlike last year, this is really all that's going on in the general fund. Again, we're kind of the same as last year. The problem here for us, as you're going to see in about another 10 minutes, is that when we scheduled that $75,000 last year to be offset by the surplus, yeah, at least it was my thought that would go away and we'd come back down. But we obviously have run into a couple other things here, in particularly those legal expenses that prohibit that. So highway, we got changes all around, and equals to be about a 12.66 change in expenses. And I will say that what I have proposed here, and I've been talking about it for a while, the big one is to have a person come on that specializes or focuses on buildings and grounds. I put them under the highway department rather than the general fund as we did before, because I'm not expecting it, but if there's excess time, they will slide over to the highway department. Another reason why I've got it in the highway department is because they've been covering it the last, 15, 18 months, 2 years since we made kind of the change. I think it was a novel idea. I understand it. I just think that now that we've been through it, and we brought somebody on last year, part-time, well, basically seasonal, to help us in the wintertime with the sidewalks and the driveways and et cetera. I certainly see enough work in the summertime, not just in just the routine maintenance, custodial, janitorial duties that we've got here at Damon Hall and the rec center, but just I see some painting that needs to be done at the library. We got the rack, the roof at the barn. We've got some work over at the activity center. Essentially, anything buildings related that needs to be done. At the moment, it's kind of a mixture of whoever's got the time. I pick up a fair amount. Bill picks up a lot. Martin picks some up. Clyde, Laura picks it up. That is just needs some focus and attention, and I've got that in there. In the highway department, I can separate that out as kind of a separate buildings and grounds, but he is in with the rest of the crew, so that amount pops up in both the summer maintenance and the winter maintenance. But that position right there, we got them for some overtime here, but if we come across, would cost the town $63,000. That includes his health insurance. Whoever this person is, we have budgeted at the high side for a family plan. That is at $18 an hour, and that would be the cost to the town. Phil, just for your quick answer to you, asked this the other day at the meeting. Our expense for health benefits is about 17% of personnel costs. That's just our cost. It cost us, or what we're anticipating with the new plan, is about $200,000 per year in health insurance. Come July, 10% of the premium is going to be with the employees, but it gives us a little bit of a breakdown. That $200,000 equals about $16,000, $16,500 per month. Again, that's not, that 16 includes both the employer and the employee cost there, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of a taste.
The 17% includes both? Or just
17% is just the employer part.
Side.
Yeah. So I just want to let you know that that number is in there, and he is included in these increases that I've got presented to you. The other big items that are in here in the highway, I'll just go to it. Next biggest one is essentially paving. I have us going from essentially $80,000 to $120,000. And if anybody has been out on the roads and is looking carefully, most of our roads are kind of beyond where they need to be. Brownsville Road and Queechee Road are kind of a poster child for it. But there you've got it right there, the proposed budget going from 80 to 120. I don't think we're through there. I believe that the number we ultimately need to get to is about 180, 190. And I suspect it's going to take us maybe another 2 budget years to get there. The project that we've got for about the 6/10 of a mile over on Brownsville Road is about $123,000. That includes $6,000 for some shoulder ditching. Obviously we're doing a little bit more over there than necessary. Well, not necessary, but a little bit more over there than we have in the past. In fact, that we're grinding that up and reclaiming it, and then laying payment down over that. But that is kind of a tip of the iceberg. As you look at a lot of our roads, again, just the aprons that we've got alone, and the potholes and some of the other cracks and deterioration that we've got, and I'll get into some historic numbers in a few minutes, it has been $80,000 or thereabouts for 10 to 15 years, and I don't think that number is keeping up. And we need to get to a better, or put more behind the paving to get to where we need to go. Didn't make as big of an increase as I wanted to in the hard pack. Again, I'm going to show you some historic numbers from the highway department. Here we take a jump of about $10,000 from $65,000 to $75,000. Again, we have laid down about $65,000 so far this year. I think that, again, kind of like the paving, it is necessary, and we need to continue to put the materials down on the roads to essentially create a better road and get something over the rocks that we're hitting and a lot of the clay surface that we've got. Subcontracting is another one. I've upped it from 15 to 25. This is a place that I see us utilizing in the future. I think that we're going to buy this for a lot of the ditching work that we have coming down the pike. Some of this will be offset by some grant money as long as it still exists. But this is an area that obviously is one of the focus areas for me. And again, I'm going to clump this in with the buildings and grounds person, paving, hard pack, and the subcontracting work really is the impetus behind the increase in the highway department. Building, I'm just going to add, I look back in the history in these numbers, and I'll go over the historic numbers, but I believe we've been working with the same number of crew since Hiram's day, I guess. Okay. And we are compensating for the buildings and grounds guy. So this is where it gets a little bit interesting. So again, the 12.66, however, we had the $90,000 offsetting last year. So instead of a 12.66 increase, we now need to compensate for all that good surplus that we used. So it really creates a 22% increase in the tax money that we need to raise. So to kind of get us off of, and I'll come to a final tax number in a few minutes, but in order to kind of wean us down off of what we did last year, I've got a $45,000 number here off of the fund surplus. And I'll go over the fund surplus in a few minutes. And that brings it down, again, without the 45, it would be, even higher. So it's essentially double the number that we had last year, because again, we had $100,000 offsetting that tax increase. Going to take a moment to just, I forgot to go over in the general fund. This is a fairly important component. The capital improvements, I have got as $60,000 again for this year. And I want to go down because it's important to kind of go over what I've got in there for capital improvements. So start right off, the $12,000 is the remainder part of the library roof. The $7,500 is for Damon Hall and the roof over the vault. If anybody walked in, and I've got some pictures here for you, has seen that roof, it has deteriorated quite a bit. And that's something we should most likely address before that starts to leak, and not afterwards, due to what is in the vault and what we need to keep safe. The $27,000 is an accumulation of things for the recreation center. Some of it we can do this year, that'd be great, but the way we're going for the budget this year, I don't think that's going to happen. The $27,000 is for the stairs, the front part of the stairs. That's nothing new. We had that last year, and again, we had to bump it to this year. It includes the overhang over the stairs, and it also includes, if anybody's been over at the rec center, there's 2 windows in the back that have deteriorated extremely. And we have some foundation issues there as well, and the water is essentially dripping off of the roof. It's almost the same identical problem that we've got at the activity center. It's like the same roof. I'm convinced they built it at the same time. And I've got pegged some gutters and replacement of those windows. And I think you're all pretty familiar with the front stairs and the library roof. I'm just going to pass these around because it has the Damon Hall roof over Clyde's vault, and it's got the back of the rec center, and I'm just going to pass this around so you can take a look at it.
I think you should do it right now. Just push me right over the edge.
You're encouraging.
Dave, when do you want questions? That's my guess. Otherwise, I don't know. Oh, this is nice.
The font is too small, I can't read it. Do you have something hidden in there?
So I presented this to you when I went and brought in some hard pack for the roads as to why I felt we could afford that. I've updated this to include the $45,000 that I'm proposing to apply to the fiscal year 20 budget. Essentially, using the $45,000, it brings the fund balance or surplus down to $273, and I'm basing that upon essentially where I'm estimating, again, the audit numbers haven't completely come in, but where I'm estimating the fund balance to come in at the end of fiscal year 18. Above this year's budgeted 80, this would make up the differential for the paving, provided we do it in the May. This was I've got Hart Pack, but this is the estimated number between the material and the trucking above and beyond what we had budgeted this year. And then remember, we utilized $90,000 in the 2019 budget, so it brings us down to the 208 number, but we had 65 or thereabouts come in from FEMA, giving us the 273. If I take the 45 for next year's budget, does not leave us with 273, it leaves us with 230, 220,
220.
somewhere in there.
Dave,
Yep.
do we still have the money from this year's budget to cover the paving that we didn't do last fall? Or this was going to be done?
So it is still, it's still in that number is still in the highway budget to do the paving on Brownsville Road,
Yeah.
including utilizing surplus left over from last year, because we didn't do any paving last year, if you recall, due to the July 1st storms.
Okay, so the figure you had on 120 is for other paving, correct?
Say that again?
Yes, it's figure 20.
Yeah, has nothing to do. You have 120,000 in for paving for the budget we're proposing, has nothing to do with Brownsville Road.
Correct.
Okay.
Going forward,
Yeah.
going forward,
Yeah.
prior, future budgets. So this is the equipment fund as I see it now. As you can see, much different numbers here than the $600,000 to $700,000 that we were looking at last year. Why is that? Well, here we've got the 1 ton that we pushed up a year. We have the 10-wheeler here that we pushed up a year. We have got another 10-wheeler that we feel needs to replace the one that we've got now. Again, I don't even want to bring it up, but we had a couple occasions last year that it was getting towed. Both of those are 9 years old anyways. These two were kind of similar years. One was a 6-wheeler being replaced by a 10-wheeler. This is a 10-wheeler to be replaced by a 10-wheeler. Again, these weren't in the picture yet last year. Due to what we know now and where we're at, it obviously still healthy, but not quite as healthy as we were last year. So in that budget, we put back the $15,000 that we kind of took out of the equipment fund, and we are now funding that at prior year levels. Due to, one, we said we were going to do that, but now I see the necessity to do that and to be consistent with it. It's going to get a little bit tight right about here, but I think that once we get through this and can continue to build things up a little bit, I think we'll be kind of on our way. And I think we'll be looking at trying to maintain kind of a more consistent turnover of the vehicles and try and have a little bit more consistency with the equipment fund and with the vehicles going forward.
What is B&G?
Buildings and grounds truck, that pickup truck. Okay, so it brings us back to the highway, and again, I'm real focused. Last year was the general fund, this year is the highway. And I've kind of put some numbers. I didn't have quite enough time to put it all in graph form, but I think you can, once I explain it, I think you can see it pretty well. Although I did put the budget of the highway department going back to 2003 on here. And it's fairly telling. What I would like to say is it's not quite as steep as one might think. This increase rate here, 2006 going into 2007, we had a reappraisal, so the tax rate went down. But that's kind of a side note. In this year, we put before this, the highway benefits, the insurance and workers' comp and stuff used to be in the general fund. And we rightfully took the highway folks out, their benefits and stuff, and put it into the highway fund. And when we did that, it created about a $130,000 differential, obviously driving an increase in the highway fund. But what I find really telling here, and you can't see the kind of the thin line right at about the $1 million mark for a budget, but we got 7 years right here. Right to there. From here to here, we run at $1 million or just under $1 million for 7 straight years. And again, I'll get into some concrete numbers, but it's pretty difficult to keep anything level funded for 7 years without it affecting something. And you can't, again, it kind of goes back to what I've been preaching about kind of keeping a consistent increase. What happens if you ultimately is you kind of go from this to that. You got to make up for it at some point. And I'm going to say that that's kind of where we're at the moment. And I think it becomes even more telling here is when you get into the numbers a little bit. Again, from 2003 to 2010, we worked pretty hard to get to a certain point, and then we kind of just leveled off. Paving has been at $80,000 now, with an exception of 2009, for 11 years. Asphalt prices have gone the way of the oil prices, and you know, it's kind of goes up and down, but to reclaim product and to lay down new asphalt is not the same cost as it was 12 years ago. And yet we have stayed extremely static in that, and we have stretched it thin to the point where, you know, now it's time to play catch up here. Just like, you know, at one point there was some recognition here. We went from 45 to 80, you know, and there we've been. Although I will point out there was a couple of years that we had grant money and we spent more. Hard pack. Again, kind of an interesting tale. First couple of years, we went from hardly anything up into 102,000. And actually, for several years, we were much more than what we've even been budgeting lately. So we increased, and then we tapered off. Again, think of that budget graph that I presented, those 7 years of static expenses. Well, here we go. And to some extent, even worse, the actual expenses are far below what we budgeted. So we worked fairly hard to get to a certain point, and then we've kind of have gone the other way. So other than the paving that has been static for 13 years, you know, I'm budgeting really nothing more than what was budgeted 10 years ago. The 75 is less than 2016 and much less than what we did in the mid-2010 area. Subcontracting, again, we made an effort here to kind of push the numbers, and we seem to coincide with it. And then we left it and we kind of let it slide, and Budgeting, I would probably do the same thing because we really weren't utilizing it. Although at this point in time, I think we see a need to do more than what we've got the capabilities of doing with all the ditching and stuff. So 25 is really, again, in line with where we've kind of been historically. So what is being offered here is not anything drastic until you look at the tax increase that it kind of gives us. But, when I look around and I talk to the folks on the roads and I talk with Bill and the Better Back Roads folks and the materials and what we're using, we've got to use the materials. We've got to, utilize something more than the 4 guys that we've got, 5 guys. I'm not, other than the paving, but I think that's catch up there, is nothing outside the historic realm of where we've been, other than the fact that, yeah, after 7 years, it's a bump.
What happened that year that all of a sudden it was, what year is that?
On which,
Oh, I don't see it anymore.
over here was Irene.
Oh, well,
This is, I think,
Yeah,
the
yeah, that
culvert. I think that's the new culvert over on Densmore.
oh, okay.
And again, this was a paving grant that I think that we had there.
Dave, I thought we did quite a bit of subcontracting last year. Would have been more than the 5,000 that you had done.
2018, we did not a whole lot more than that, actually. Matt did some work on the July 1st storms. Mark Palmer, that billing only came to like $3,500 for all the culvert work on Hartland Hill.
Okay.
And then we had a little bit over on Densmore. So it might have been a little bit more, but it didn't add up to,
And there was a grant project.
yeah. So it didn't really add up to as much as you would think. Although this year we've kind of blown that out of the water with the trucking that we did with hard pack, and a couple other things. So there's a bit of a difference there. Oh, I jumped the gun, hold on. So we saw the 22%. So what does this really mean for us? There's the 22 right there. It is a 22% increase in the highway. And again, I got a graph for you, and it'll become a little bit more clearer as to why all of a sudden it's a 22 and oh my God, 22%. The overall tax rate comes in at 9.75. Not pretty, although this is where we ironically started out last year. So last year we had the 13% increase in the general fund, 3% increase in the highway fund, and about a 9.5%, 10% increase before we were done. This year it's the exact opposite, and we're right back to roughly the 9 number. Where does that stand historically? Again, I kind of like the differential in let me see if I can get the other one. All right, so give me just a second here.
Looks pretty flat. I'll take it.
Yeah, okay. So there it is historically, but you can see when we pull up the graph, you can see the increase that we had in the general fund last year, and we used the tax money to offset that, bringing this down, and now we're back up. So this kind of evens out, this comes back up. If all things had been kind of if we didn't utilize or offset some of that last year, this would be kind of a straight line here. It would be an increase, but certainly not what we've got here. So again, you've kind of got to overlook, and I know it's hard to overlook a 22% number, but you kind of have to overlook at that to the 10% combined number over last year. And this is the tax rate, the full tax rate. This is the general fund tax rate. This is the highway. This is the full tax rate over the last 17 years. Again, this was the last semi-reappraisal rate here, and you don't see a decrease here because we added the benefits to the highway fund and maintained kind of a straight line there.
What, can you tell us the increase for the general fund, number-wise, what the number is, how much more?
I can't.
For both of them, actually. I actually found it, Dave.
Okay.
Tell us.
For $250,000 house, the increase is about $113. And the increase is, it's actually a decrease, Matt, of $3,000,
In the general fund?
3,500 maybe, in the general fund. Yeah. Highway fund is about 125,000. So it's about $125,000 combined, $125,000 combined increase between the highway fund and the general fund. So if necessary, I think next week, and again, the library will be here, we can divulge into the individual departments if you like. But in the meantime, I'm here to answer the overall questions. If you have specific questions for the departments, they are all here tonight. Be more than glad to answer anything for you. And be more than glad to answer or go into anything that you might like.
Did I understand you to say that the seasonal employee will become a full-time employee? Or
That's
not?
proposed,
That's
yes.
proposed in the new budget.
Dave, I wasn't sure if the cemetery committee had tree work or was that in the highway? And it's too early, but is there any money for the emerald ash borer? sort of piece. Or should we start to build any funding for that?
You asked about the cemetery fund, and then what?
The EAB?
The ash trees are all gonna die, so we need money to take them down.
There's nothing for the trees, other than the money that we've got budgeted for tree work, which is either 8 or 10,000. I think it's 8 for the highway, just for the general tree maintenance.
Okay.
And the $3,500 is in there for the cemeteries. There it is right there. As is the $1,000 for miscellaneous items. And the labor used to be in there. I've got it all over the highway. If we go forward with the buildings and grounds position, next year I'll probably pull over the miscellaneous maintenance items that go with it. But I kind of tried to stay consistent and just, technically the highway crew that's kind of their responsibility, or envisioned anyways. And so I've just got that there. But the $3,500 is there, nothing for the trees. I wouldn't even know where to start with that. And again, we can get into individual departments if you'd like. Conservation did submit a budget. They asked for $500 more than what they have historically asked for as a contributing number to the project over at the school.
Okay. Right. The 17-acre.
Yeah, they asked for $500.
Yeah.
I think that's essentially a school grant at this point.
And just a pet peeve, the tripping hazard of the sidewalk right here along the hall, is that any funding to address that at all?
Nope. It's on the list. I would probably look at that with the drainage that needs to be done. So we've got, that whole side would need to be looked at, as well as, some of the window panes and, the drainage that we've got going on. We got some stuff that seeps into my office, and I think it's creating kind of, although I don't believe there's been a whole lot of movement recently, but I believe it's somewhat responsible for the tilt of the vault. So we got a fair amount going on over there.
Right.
Is the state police and the appropriations number?
It's in the assessment number.
Assessment number.
I would add,
Is that still
Phil,
in the neighborhood of
and to the
56?
board, that in that capital projects, that did not add up to the work I've kind of proposed, doesn't add up to 60, but I've got 2 numbers in there to start putting money into essentially a reserve fund. So I've simply have level funded that 60. It's not much, but the differential, I've got 4 going to the library for the HVAC system. That's questionable, maybe 5-year shelf life on that, although we've given it some new heart and lungs.
Okay.
And we've got 4,500 in there, so it's about 9,500 I have left over that's not designated at the moment. To start building up, I think, is a much needed reserve account for our buildings and grounds.
How much, 8,000?
What's that?
How much is left over for that reserve fund?
I've got, so right here, Mary, see this 4 and the 45? So 4 is for the HVAC system, and 45 is essentially for a building reserve account. Just to, just to start putting away.
Have we gotten all our FEMA money reimbursement?
I think we're waiting on one more payment of about 10 to 15, I believe. I need to call, unless it's come in, which was for the Heartland Hill work. And then I think, he canceled because of maybe the snow tonight. Vermont Emergency Management has asked us to close out the Jennyville grant from Hurricane Irene. Martha, I think this is the one you were showing me, that still has like $30,000, I believe, due to come in. So things never really moved very quickly with them, but that never got finalized. There was quite a bit of open projects with that, and I believe that one, they've come to us and are looking to close out.
If I recall correctly, the Planning Commission was going to look at parking in the library/barn area. Did that finish up with any budget requests at all?
I think that's kind of in the queue between, you know, my discussions with neighbors out of Queechee to look at the sidewalk portion going to the library.
Right.
And then kind of tackle that as another phase back there, so it's essentially on the back burner.
And how about the sidewalk from the post office down to the library?
Nothing would be budgeted for that at this point.
Isn't there a sidewalk grant we've used before?
We were going to look into a sidewalk grant for that.
Yeah.
It's the bike ped grant.
Yeah.
There would be a 20% match, but I don't have a timeline or something, and I am hesitant with where we're at with the budget at this point to put something in there until I know something more definitive. Last estimate I saw for that portion of the project was $66,000.
David, I know I recently asked you this, but as we all know, our budget is a small amount compared to the school budget. So from a taxpayer's perspective, do we have any sense of where the school budget is kind of emerging?
I don't. I do know that they had a kind of they had it, or did they have it right before or after Thanksgiving?
There's a meeting tomorrow night that's about a variety of things, but I don't know that it's going to be a budget.
I have not. I had one communication with the finance guy over the supervisory union about Joe Olmsted Jr.'s position, because part of that money comes from them. But I haven't heard where they're at in the budget process.
Yeah. Yeah, tomorrow night is that different kids, different passions, or different passions?
There's after-school programs, and they're treating, I think, different outcomes with some math and science.
Yeah.
Creating new events.
Okay.
But not the budget. I don't think it involves the budget at all.
Yeah, I think there's no input on programming. No budget.
And John, the rec department budget's up by 21,000, is that right?
Well, after the health insurance savings, it will be. That'll be, Joe and I will both family plans, so that'll be 14,000 saved right there for health insurance.
I think they're down close to 15.
Okay, I wonder where I saw that then.
Good amount was that, maybe a little bit more. They were. I actually had highlighted them. But I don't think I felt. recreation program is down 20 grand. I think that part of that was a big portion of that was the health insurance, moving to a different health insurance plan. Both Joe and John are on a family plan. So that was a savings to the town, and the after-school payroll, we brought down like $6,000–7,000 as well. And there was a transportation number that we had budgeted for last year that we didn't feel necessary, so those three items kind of combined brought it down 20 grand.
When you look at our numbers, you have to remember that we have income as well. And we brought in $160,000 last year, so you take that, $255, the actual spend, and what you actually paid for a rec farm of $95,000.
So they're down and the revenues are kind of projected to be up a bit.
The way the water program works is that you get this increased revenue, there's also increased expenses. So we get more kids to go on a trip, then we have to pay more for the trip because we're paying price of admission when we go to a baseball game in the water park or wherever we go. We get more people participating and we pay more expenses out, but then the bottom line is bringing more money from the program as well. So it's just been higher participation rates, I think, for the last few years. So part of the increased expenses is also kind of increased revenues as well.
So you haven't seen, since there's a decrease in the school population,
Starting to see it this year.
oh, okay.
The school, I think, is sitting just under 290, and the kindergarten through second grade is 82 students. So if that's 1/3 of the school, you see the school population could 5-6 years be under 250, could be more like 240, 250. Noticing that our numbers in our after-school program are down a little bit by a percentage, and I think there's the after-school program caters to the 5, 6, 7-year-olds. Those are the ones that need the place to be after school, and there's just less of them now.
Yeah.
The current first grade in Hartland is down to 15 kids. The K is bigger. The K, I think, is 29. The school population is going down everywhere.
Dave, were you thinking of just asking the various department heads for any general comments?
Again, we can get into the individual, into the details next meeting, but
Okay.
we are here to respond to you guys, unless you want to ask them for specific comments.
Right.
Fine.
Well, I mean, I'm curious for Doug, with the change in software over the last year and a half or 2 years, and the reappraisal coming down the pike, are you feeling prepared, or are you looking for more or less? Not less, that's obviously pretty silly, but...
Well, I feel less prepared than I wish I was, but I'm probably going to have anyway.
Yeah.
However, we're now talking about the year that started in July. So both of the reappraisal will have been dealt with. So both of the reappraisal was in this year's budget.
Okay.
That we're living in now. And my budget going forward is actually less than that because we're anticipating a hump of things in my budget. So although the increased legal fees, I think, are going to be a result of anticipated appeals and stuff like that.
Right.
The rule of thumb for a year of reappraisal is to expect about 10% of people to grieve, maybe 10% of those folks to go on to the BCA. And so it's a run at the BCA or after BCA when it starts costing money. But
Okay.
if that model is right, then we should have 160 grievances next year, 16 BCA cases, and certainly an increase of what we've had before. I don't know if it'll happen. I'm trying to get out in front of that with advertising and to try to help people understand what to expect as much as possible. And when we do get the actual numbers, then I want to have a few public meetings around that to answer the first 5 or 6 questions that most people would have as a reval. I just want to try to get out in front of that a little bit to keep grievances and things down. But
So then you
there's
think,
still going to be more activity. It wouldn't be prudent to just say, it's going to be easy.
so you think then 10% of those 16 cases who are going to will probably go to the BCA, 10% of that 16 will then go past?
I don't know.
That's not the
rule
model?
of thumb I heard didn't go that far.
Ah.
It was maybe 10% would grieve, 10% go on to the BCA. In terms of after, I don't know.
Mhm.
And this year we had 3 BCA cases that all continuing their appeal. And I can't guess about next year. I'm going to say it's going to probably cost more.
Yeah.
I don't really know.
Does the reappraisal affect budget year 20, and can we expect more money from the reappraisal that's unexpected?
So, I had this conversation with Bill over at Reeves. So, we raise the amount of money that the town votes to expect. The reappraisal doesn't give us any more than that. So what it does is it alters the tax rate. So, let's just say, to keep things kind of simple, there's no new building, no nothing, we just go out and reassess, and everybody's value went up. We still need to raise the $1,750,000, regardless of the grand list. So with the new grand list number, we figure out what we need to satisfy that $1,750,000, and that we get our tax rate to generate that $1,750,000. So it affects the tax rate. It doesn't necessarily give us more money than what's been approved by the voters for us to spend. Does that make sense?
So would that happen next year or not? Would it affect this budget?
So, and Doug, correct me if I'm wrong, but so they will set the grand list in June? July, and that'll be with the new reappraised.
So we would put out, we'd like to do this as our usual schedule, which means our first revision comes out early June, then people have a chance to grieve, and after the grievance process is when the tax rate is typically set.
So when we set the tax rate in July for a tax bill to go in August, that'll be based off of hopefully the new grand list. So, but it's kind of a crapshoot as to what that is going into, say, town meeting. So I'm going to, for argument's sake or for discussion's sake, I'll use our present grand list as kind of a apples to apples kind of a conversation. But it could very well be that your tax rate is lower than it was this year. Of course, your house may be assessed higher, or we've just stumbled across 35 more houses than we thought we had, and that's $2.5 million for the grand list that no matter what happened to your assessment is going to push your tax rate lower. Does that make sense?
Is that what you're finding? A bunch of houses that you didn't know about?
We have found, since it started in July of 2017, the informal count is between 15 and 20 dwellings that were discovered, let's say, that were not on tax rolls. Now, some of those are brand new this year, like you might expect every year. There's going to be new stuff going on. So some of those are just new, and we knew about them, and they're legitimately new. Some of them been at 4 or 5 years, and we're just finding them
They haven't paid taxes for 4 or 5 years?
in some cases. So by getting those properties on the rolls, there's also, we have some solar arrays that will be taxed this year for the first time. So the owners of some of the large solar arrays over a certain size are taxable, and there's 3 that I know of in town that will be collecting some amount from that we have not in the past year on the solar side. But just by getting things tightened up, because this really hasn't been done since 2001 in terms of really trying to go and look at every property. So with no zoning or building permits, it's only natural that unless you're really driving up the end of every single road, you're not going to know all those things. So.
But you are driving up
now
every road.
and finding all kinds of stuff. And so we've been working with Dave, and I'm sure he's been sharing stuff.
So if somebody somehow 4 years ago built a house and nobody knew about it, is there any retroactive thing?
Typically not, and it kind of goes the other way too. Like if, let's say, you could be overassessed slightly or something, and unless you, I mean, there's the abatement method, but typically it's like, the basic assumption is that all property owners, taxpayers are looking at their bill, they're looking at their assessment. Every time your assessment changes, you get an individual notice. And it's incumbent upon us as property owners to make sure we're looking at that bill. If that doesn't seem right, then it's our responsibility to talk to the listers and make sure that that's right. So it does go both ways a little bit.
That's not really analogous, though. I mean, these people who built houses, they're not getting anything at all. They're not getting an assessment or a bill from you, so.
Yeah, it's kind of.
I agree. So that's the way our system is currently set up.
Kind of the difference between a mistake
Yeah.
and someone who's cheating.
So we have, I agree.
Yeah.
No, I agree with that. And I am wholeheartedly for a building permit system, but it's not this year. But, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So there's no front end to my process other than us driving out and discovering things in a quasi-random fashion. So that's not a good place to be for the long run. So I'm hoping that in the next few years we can dial something in that will be acceptable to folks and help us to be more fair to everybody, because that's really what it's about.
And that's the only way to do it, is a building permit
I
system?
think that would be the most efficient way to do it. You could, buy the listers a car, and we can just spend an awful lot of time driving around looking at everything all the time. That's not very efficient. Just like looking out once every 5 years going everywhere isn't that efficient either. So a building permit system of some sort, I don't want to get off the weeds here, but if you had something that was easy to comply with and it spanked you enough that it makes you want to really do the right thing, that could be successful, I believe, to find new property.
I was thinking we should buy some drones. Yeah.
Well,
And
I was at
then
a
our legal fees
demonstration
would go
where
up
the
probably.
guys from the University of Vermont, when you pick one day in April, they can fly a drone all over town in one day, do everything you need to do in
Yeah.
terms of looking at the outside.
Yeah,
But I personally think that most people wouldn't like the idea of the drone flying. over.
I think you're right.
I think it would
Maybe
be
a
shot
good
down.
target practice or something, Right, but I'm just, the technology is
It's
amazing
coming.
what's out there.
Yes, it's really that.
But I think we want to be responsible about introducing stuff like that.
That's a really bad idea.
Yeah, right. So the technology's there, it doesn't mean it's the right thing for Hartland.
Martin, I was just thinking back that the beginning of this year was a big year for your office, and there were a lot of consultants in, changes to the chart of accounts, and I think new software, but not, or second year of software. So are you seeing any sort of impacts in those areas, or things pretty settled right now?
Things are pretty settled. So last year, the auditors had, I think it was 5 pages of adjusted entries. This year, there was 2 pages of adjusting entries. Kate Riley, the consultant, did an incredible job.
Great,
She got you guys back in order pretty much, and I'm just copying what she's done.
okay,
I've done this kind of work for the last 26 years.
Yep.
I understand the ins and the outs. I look at the checkbook every day. I make sure everything's the way it's supposed to be, so I have no surprises. So if David comes to me, I can tell him what's going on.
great, good,
Kate, you get your money's worth out of Kate. There's no doubt about it.
okay,
She did an
good,
incredible job.
good, good. And Dave mentioned that essentially that the computer system in Damon Hall is not totally up for review, but at least the server portion. And
Yeah, CCI every month. Yeah, they're right on the ball. If we have any issues, we can email them, and we have an answer within 15
right.
minutes.
But is there going to be, do you foresee any expense if we move the data into the cloud versus actually having a physical drive? Or is that too
I
early?
believe it's kept at NIMR. I believe the backup is kept.
I think this is something slightly different.
Okay.
What I believe you're referring to is
You know,
so
maybe
CCI
premature with,
has recommended that we get rid of our local server
right,
and get it on the cloud, mainly for reliability reasons.
correct.
Because they're expecting that to blow up within the next year, and if we're really leaning on that heavily,
Right.
we're going to be in
Right.
another
Okay.
spot.
So Dave, there's no real budgeting for that at this point. We don't really know how that's going to shake out. Okay,
We pay extra for the server to service the server
yeah,
on a monthly basis. And in 2 years, we're going to need to upgrade that server. So doing away with it, going to the cloud is actually a cost savings for us, with the exception of what we as a group have kind of talked to going to the cloud, and I keep forgetting the name of it, OneDrive. But the big hurdle would be to put things in all the shared folders. The individual departments would need to have one person oversee, basically be the gatekeeper to those shared folders, and that's a step that we haven't reconciled or determined we're either ready for or want to take or
right.
give it the green light.
Yeah, because it's pretty easy to store it, but sometimes hard to retrieve it. And I think that's the organizational piece that needs to happen. But that, again, there's no budget impact at this point for that.
Not tonight. It would be a positive one for us.
Thank you. And Bill? There was some discussion this year of, all the great work with the hard pack that went down, and now that we're into sanding season, of changing the mixture of sand to being a manufactured sand as well as sand. Is that something that has a budget impact for the coming year, or is that?
Yeah, we increased the budget for winter sand for next year,
Okay,
so we can blend in some of that manufactured sand in with the bank run stuff we use now.
yep. Great.
And then how about salt for this year? Is that, I saw that article in the paper about the great increase in salt prices. Is that going to affect us?
I don't think so. I think we budgeted.
Budgeted probably what we have. Salt is something that we kind of go by past few years to try and come in somewhere wherever the trends are leading us. Unfortunately, with salt, if there's a spike, we're generally not. If there's a spike, we're generally not covered for the spike.
Yeah, there seems to be. So then I'm talking about this year because it'll affect next year. So.
Well, it's tough to say. This year's may or may not. Was it 2 years ago? Was it 2 years ago, Bill? There was a real shortage of salt. They couldn't even get it up, on the trains. I'm not sure what was going on, and
drove up the price and created all kinds of problems, and then everybody's ready for the next year, and it wasn't an issue. I don't know, Bill, if you have any comments on that, or?
You've got all salt in now for this winter? You don't have to buy any?
We're gonna buy it every week.
It gets delivered.
All throughout.
So we have a per tonnage price,
So it could
and
be,
the salt shed isn't all that big, so we buy it.
okay.
We have a per tonnage price that is offered to us, and we order it in quite a bit. So if we do get caught, so if there is a shortage, last year, I think towards the end, we almost got caught without salt once or twice.
I would guarantee by the vendor that's not gonna happen this year, so.
Okay.
We don't have tremendous ability to cushion ourselves. Again, we've got a week, 2 weeks worth, 1 storm, 2 storms.
Is that something that we should do in future years, is build a bigger salt shed?
Certainly, I don't know if it's gonna really affect the price. The prices are already set from the vendor we use. The contractor already shows what they project we're gonna use and what the price is.
And they'll keep that price for the whole winter?
Yep.
Okay.
We could get a bigger shed, but we'd need the room for it. We just not room at the time garage
Right.
now. You'd have to lock it up so people can stop stealing it. That would help.
Ah.
So Phil, regarding the sidewalk, I was just thinking if it happened in the summer of 2020, we needed the 2021 budget anyway, so it doesn't
Yeah.
even really, it kind of extends beyond this particular budget.
Which, I mentioned
Over
2
here.
sidewalks.
Oh,
The one,
Over there,
here.
okay.
Oh, I thought we got one.
Yeah. Okay. So what are we missing?
You know, in that regard,
Money.
Dave, it's not
Yep.
much to do with the budget, but we ought to be looking toward that grant idea, because if we do have a delay in the intersection project, we have a better chance of coordinating the 2 things at the same time.
I think that's been in the back of our mind. I'll need to remind her again, but I think that, what's her name, Bill, over at Two Rivers, Ryan, there's a springtime application for that.
Is it D or?
There's Rita Cito.
Rita, thank you, yes, thank you. So we actually bumped it down a little bit, Mary, from 40 to 35 on the sand, to kind of coincide again. The last 3 years, we've been at 27, 38,000, 30,000. So you kind of pick a number based upon historic numbers there, and we went with 35 in this instance. Actually, so this year, the budget that we're in now is at 40. Going into 2020, we've got 35. 35, I'm sorry.
And you're thinking because winters are warmer, we won't need as much, or?
In this case, on a number like this, I'm strictly looking at historic numbers. You know, it's like fuel. You know, if you look at Damon, the rec center is like the prime example. You look at their fuel use last year, and history is, you know, kind of at a number, and then all of a sudden you're like way up. You know, so I tend to recognize that that was a cold year, and I'll pick a number probably somewhere between that number and the historic number. And I won't just completely react. And in this case, again, I'm looking at 27, 37, 30. So 35 seems to be a number dead center, you know, the median or mean or average.
Yeah.
So I kind of go with that.
Any more comments from anyone? Something burning to say?
Oh, that's a good question.
Questions?
With the health insurance changes, was there any thought of maybe like a health savings account or something for like a compensation or like some sort of a, or it's a pretty drastic change? Wasn't exactly well received in my house. I brought that in.
Yeah. It was brought up.
Okay.
Yeah, we definitely were aware of what we were doing, and that there would be some consequences, yeah. I don't know what to say.
All right,
Things-
I just want to ask, you don't advocate for yourself, who does?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
When you have to advocate for your family as well.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you've lost ground then in terms of total benefits and salary?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I guess we should, before we
Yeah.
finish what we're doing, we should have some examples, Dave, to look at.
If you want to do a health savings, you can't offer a low deductible plan.
No, that's not what I'm getting at. Just examples of how this has affected their overall take-home on a few of the employees, just so we can see what the impact is, and then we can decide if we should do something or not.
I'm very interested in not that we have anything to do with it, but the parity between town employees and school employees. I think that'd be very
So
useful.
I would agree, actually, so looking forward, again, with a 10% increase is pretty tough to factor all this in. I didn't mention, there is a 2.7% increase for the employees built into this. That's based on a CPI index of what the growth is in New England.
Mhm.
And that's simply a cost of living adjustment.
Yep.
That's not to, that's not, it's simply a cost of living adjustment, is simply what a lot of companies call it. And, I've always done it based upon a CPI, so if the economy is good and the milk or the bread is more expensive, then the employees can see a larger, or CPI is going to be a larger increase. For a few years there, the CPI was like 0.8, which is very low.
Yeah.
And kind of non-existent, but then again, the growth was pretty non-existent. So there is the cost of living adjustment. I would say, and again, I've given this thought, but I kind of have to go with, pick your battles here, because obviously, we can't fortunately solve all our issues with one budget. This has taken us two budgets, and that would be a 14 to 15% increase over 2 years. But I would concur that I would say in most departments, I think that we're probably running. I think that we should look at some adjustments at some point. I'm not entirely sure. Again, I think we got to go, in my mind, and I'm speaking as a manager and trying to guide the board here. I think that by far the neglect, I'll call it, to the resources they're putting into what we need to do just to function in our jobs, I would prioritize first. Noting that we need to take care of some other issues.
Just one comment for John. I'm sure you realize this, but you can remind yourself that your insurance is going to change before your salary by 6 months, because insurance is done by the calendar. And then in July 1st, whatever increase your salary is going to get, that's when you will realize that. So there's a 6-month lag there because of that, the way that insurance thing is.
Yeah, new
Has-
insurance kicks in January 1st.
That's right, that's right. That's right, and you've got 6 months on your old salary before you can realize an increase. So that's just a reality of how it works.
But I take your point that costs have decreased by $20,000, right? Is that what you're thinking? And yet,
But Joe and I are both family plans.
yeah,
It's a big drop from our personal budget.
yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of ways to achieve equity, but it's hard.
Yeah.
You know, and it's one of the reasons why I was trying to drive, or just what are the percentages for health insurance, and then, you know, how do we sort of get out of this box? You know, so it's not, it's doable, but it's not, it's got to be, in my opinion, fair across all employees. So,
We were talking about that at the last meeting.
Right.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Anybody else got anything? Questions? Work on this, obviously,
Yeah.
before we're done. That's it? Okay, I guess we're done then, adjourned.
Thanks for coming
Yeah,
in.
thank you.
Thank you.
you can follow up on any of these.